What happens when Alucard, the legendary monster of Helsing, suddenly falls into the chaotic world of Hazbin Hotel and Helluva boss? Hell has seen powerful demons before, but it has never encountered a creature like Alucard. As he crosses paths with Blitzo, the I.M.P crew, and even Alastor, the balance of power in Hell is about to change forever. This isn't just another demon entering Hell. This is a monster meeting monsters. So sit back, stay tuned, and let's get into the story. The Pride Ring was a circus of the damned, a neon-soaked sewer where the music never stopped, because if it did, you'd hear the screaming. It was a world of commodified suffering, where the superstars were overlords who traded in souls like tech stocks, and the heroes were just the ones who hadn't been caught in a sex tape yet. In Pentagram City, death was a punchline, a temporary inconvenience in a reality where you just pulled yourself back together to be exploited another day. It was loud, it was vibrant, and it was utterly, pathologically shallow. Then, the shadows began to bleed. The arrival didn't happen with a bang or a demonic portal. It began with a silence that shouldn't have existed. In the middle of a particularly messy turf war between a group of shark demons and a cluster of low-rent succubi, the ambient noise of the city, the sirens, the distant explosions, the rhythmic thrum of Hell's industrial heartbeat, simply died. A thick, oppressive fog, the color of a fresh bruise, began to roll down the street, swallowing the neon signs. Standing in the center of the intersection was a man who looked like a relic of a more dignified nightmare. He wore a charcoal-colored suit under a long, sweeping red duster that seemed to move even when there was no wind. A wide-brimmed fedora cast a shadow over his face, save for the twin orange glints of his spectacles. He didn't look like a sinner. He didn't have the animalistic features of the native Hellborn or the jagged, colorful geometry of the typical damned soul. He looked like an aristocratic funeral director who had decided to go for a walk in the middle of a riot. What the fuck is that? Blitzo, the founder of the Immediate Murder Professionals, I.M.P, adjusted his grip on his sniper rifle from a nearby rooftop. Beside him, Moxie was frantically checking a tablet, his tail twitching in agitation. I don't know, sir. He's not showing up on the Sinner registry, and he's definitely not a Goichia. He's just there. He doesn't even have a soul signature. It's like looking at a hole in the universe. Well, he's standing in the way of our target, Blitzo growled, peering through the scope. Their mark, a bloated overlord aspirant who had skipped out on a hit contract in the living world, was currently cowering behind a burnt-out limo just 10 feet from the red-clad stranger. If he doesn't move, he's collateral, and I don't do refunds for messy work. Down on the street, the shark demons decided the stranger was an easy mark. They lunged, their jagged teeth baring in the red moonlight. The stranger didn't flinch. He didn't even reach for a weapon. Instead, his shadow, a jagged, sprawling thing that seemed to have too many eyes, suddenly detached itself from the pavement. In a blur of black bristles and red maws, the shadow rose up like a tidal wave of hounds, shredding the demons mid-air. There were no cartoonish clouds of dust, no comedic yelps. There was only the wet, heavy sound of meat hitting the ground, and the unmistakable scent of ancient, iron-rich blood. Alucard tilted his head, the brim of his hat shifting just enough to reveal a grin that was less a facial expression and more a threat. For 30 years he had wandered the void of his own existence, killing off the millions of souls within him until he was everywhere and nowhere. He had transcended the need for a physical form, yet here he was, in a realm that smelled of brimstone and cheap ambition. He tasted the air. It was foul, crowded with the spirits of the mediocre. Is this it? Alucard's voice was a low, melodic baritone that vibrated in the chests of everyone within a block. The Great Abyss? The Pit of Fire? It looks more like a strip mall for the unimaginative. Hey, Red, asshole! Blitzo yelled from the roof, waving his arms. You're ruining the choreography. That fat guy behind the car? He's mine. Move your Victorian ass before I put a hole in it. Alucard slowly looked up. His eyes didn't just see the imp. They saw through him. The trauma, the failed circus career, the desperate need for validation. It was a level of scrutiny that made Blitzo's skin crawl. An imp, Alucard mused, his grin widening to an impossible width. A bottom feeder of the hierarchy. How charming. Tell me, little thing, do you truly believe that toy in your hand can harm something that has forgotten how to die? Toy? Moxie squeaked, offended. This is a custom-made, hellfire-chambered long range. Alucard didn't wait for the explanation. In a flicker of movement that defied the physics of the Pride Ring, he was suddenly on the rooftop, standing inches away from Blitzo. The air around him felt cold. A deep, grave cold that shouldn't exist in the Inferno. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Some things can't be fixed. Blitzo froze. He had faced down angry clients, vengeful exes, and the literal princes of hell, but this was different. This wasn't the scary of a powerful demon who might kill you. This was the scary of a predator who had realized he was the only thing in the room that was actually real. "Look, buddy," Blitzo stammered, trying to regain his bravado. "I don't know what overlord you work for. Zestial? Alastor? Whoever it is, tell him we're on a schedule. We got a business to run. I.M.P doesn't take kindly to freelancers." Alucard reached out, his long, gloved fingers plucking the rifle from Blitzo's hands. He inspected it with the mild curiosity of a man looking at a strange insect, then crushed the metal into a ball of scrap as if it were made of tinfoil. "I do not work for anyone," Alucard said, his voice dropping into a whisper that carried the weight of centuries. "I am the bird of Hermes. I have eaten my wings to make me tame. But in this place, this neon-lit tomb, I find I am feeling particularly wild." He turned his gaze back down to the street. Their target, the bloated demon, had tried to make a break for it during the distraction. With a sigh of theatrical boredom, Alucard reached into the folds of his coat and produced a weapon that looked like it belonged in a museum of heavy artillery, the 454 Casul. The silver barrel caught the red light of the sky, gleaming with a predatory hunger. Bang! The sound was a physical blow. It didn't pop like a demon's pistol, it roared like a cannon. The target didn't just die, he evaporated. The explosive, silver-tipped round hit the demon's torso and turned his entire upper half into a fine red mist that coated the surrounding buildings. The soul didn't reform. There was no respawning in a few hours. The Casul, designed to hunt the undead and the monstrous, had treated the sinner's essence as what it truly was. Garbage to be incinerated. "Holy shit," Millie whispered, her eyes wide as she clutched her battle axe. He erased him." Alucard holstered the weapon, the smoke curling from the barrel like a living thing. He looked at the I.M.P crew, his orange lenses glowing. "Your hell is a loud, crowded failure. It lacks structure. It lacks poetry. It lacks a king." He stepped off the edge of the roof, his body dissolving into a swarm of bats before he hit the ground. The bats didn't fly away. They coalesced into the shadow of a massive, multi-eyed hound that began to lunge through the streets, headed toward the center of the city. In the distance, the tall, glowing tower of the Hazbin Hotel stood as a beacon of hope, a concept Alucard found profoundly hilarious. He hadn't been in this world for 5 minutes, and he already knew one thing for certain. The system here was broken, controlled by children playing at being monsters. He was going to show them what a real monster looked like. Far away in a radio station filled with shadows and jazz, a tall, slender figure in red pinstripes paused, his ears twitching. The static on his broadcast suddenly flared, turning from a dull hum into a scream of pure, unadulterated terror. Alastor, the radio demon, tilted his head, his permanent grin widening. "Oh," Alastor whispered to the empty room, "a new guest, and he sounds delicious." The cleanup in Pentagram City was usually a matter of waiting for the immortal essence of a sinner to knit itself back together around a core of sheer spite. If you got flattened by a truck or decapitated in a turf war, you eventually woke up in a dumpster, sore but intact. That was the gift of the Pride Ring, an eternity to be a victim. But as the smoke cleared from where Alucard's 454 Casul round had detonated, there was nothing left to knit. The pavement was scorched, the air tasted of ozone and holy salt, and the sinner known as Big Sal was simply gone. Not dead in the hellish sense, but erased. Blitzo stared down from the roof at the empty crater, his tail limp. "Okay, so, new rule. We don't touch the red guy's guns. Ever. Sir, he just committed a metaphysical impossibility." Moxie was hyperventilating, his hands trembling as he tried to input the event into his ledger. "That wasn't just a kill. That was a soul termination. Only angelic steel is supposed to do that. If word of this gets out, The overlords are going to have a collective stroke. The entire economy of hell is built on the fact that the workforce doesn't stay dead. Which is exactly why we need to talk to him, Blitzo said, his eyes narrowing with a sudden dangerous spark of entrepreneurship. He looked at Millie and Luna, who had joined them on the roof. Think about it. We're I.M.P. We kill people in the living world because sinners can't go back. But if we can kill sinners here, permanently? We're not just a hit service anymore. We're the ultimate janitors. We'd be the biggest thing in the Seven Rings since Lucifer's divorce. He crushed your rifle like a soda can, Blitzo, Luna pointed out, not looking up from her phone, though her ears were twitching with genuine unease. He didn't exactly look like the team player type. He looked like he wanted to eat us, and not in the fun way. He just needs a manager, a face, someone with charisma, and a very loosely defined sense of self-preservation. Blitzo leaped off the roof, his hooves clattering on the pavement below. Alucard hadn't gone far. He was standing in a narrow alleyway, leaning against a brick wall that was covered in posters for Lululand and Angel Dust's latest feature. He was smoking a cigarette, a long, white stick of tobacco that smelled of old libraries and burning cathedrals. He didn't look like he was hiding. He looked like he was waiting for the world to catch up to him. All right, Dracula, let's talk shop. Blitzo strutted into the alley, Millie and Moxie trailing behind with weapons drawn but lowered. I like your style. Big guns, theatrical entrances, a complete disregard for the local laws of physics. You're a man of taste. I'm Blitzo. The O is silent, and I run the premier assassination agency in this shithole. Alucard exhaled a cloud of smoke that took the shape of a screaming face before dissipating. He looked at the imp with an expression of profound, weary amusement. An assassination agency. In a world where no one dies, you must be very busy doing nothing. Hey, it's about the message, Blitzo snapped. But you've got the permanent touch. You join I.M.P., and we'll put you in a suit that isn't from the 1890s, get you a social media following, and we split the take 60-40. And I'm being generous because I like your hat. Alucard chuckled, a dark, dry sound that felt like sandpaper on the soul. You believe I am a mercenary? You see a god of the night and think, this would make an excellent employee? He stepped forward, his shadow stretching out and climbing the walls of the alley, blocking out the neon glow. The eyes within the shadow began to blink, hundreds of them, red and lidless. I have served a lineage of humans for a century because they had the will to command me. You? You are a court jester in a kingdom of flies. Okay, rude, Blitzo muttered, though he stepped back as a massive black hound's head emerged from Alucard's sleeve, its teeth as long as combat knives. Before the tension could snap, a group of enforcers turned the corner into the alley. These weren't low-level thugs. They were the personal security detail of a local miner overlord, a tech-obsessed sinner who dealt in illicit data mining. They were armored in high-tech Kevlar and carried rifles humming with experimental energy. V-security, hands in the air, assholes. The lead enforcer barked. We tracked a massive energy spike to this location. Unauthorized use of soul-erasing ordnance is a violation of the Pentagram City Stability Act. Surrender the weapon, or we turn this alley into a microwave. Alucard didn't turn around. He just kept looking at Blitzo. Tell me, imp, how does your agency handle the police? We usually run and scream, Blitzo said honestly. How tedious. Alucard turned toward the enforcers. He didn't reach for the casoul. He simply removed his spectacles, tucking them into his pocket. His eyes were no longer orange. They were a burning, hellish crimson. Releasing restraint level 1. The air in the alley didn't just get colder. It became heavy, as if the atmospheric pressure had tripled. Red ley lines of energy began to glow on Alucard's gloves, the Cromwell seals. Open fire! The enforcer screamed. The alley erupted in neon blue energy blasts. They tore into Alucard, ripping through his red duster, shredding his chest, and blowing a fist-sized hole through his head. Blitzo and his team dove for cover behind a dumpster as the barrage continued for a full 10 seconds, turning the space where the stranger stood into a charnel house of smoke and slag. Target neutralized, the enforcer said, lowering his rifle. Scrub the remains. Vox wants a sample of the... A sample of what, exactly? The voice came from everywhere. The smoke didn't drift away. It began to swirl into a vortex. The remains of Alucard didn't just lay there. The blood on the walls began to crawl back toward the center of the alley. The holes in the red coat stitched themselves shut with threads of shadow. Alucard stood there, perfectly intact, his head tilted at a nauseating angle before snapping back into place with a wet crunch. "Is that all?" Alucard asked, his voice dripping with disappointment. "I expected more from the future of the damned." "Your weapons are clean, sterile. There is no soul in the trigger pull." He raised a hand, and the shadows on the walls suddenly lunged. They weren't just darkness, they were physical, grasping claws. They grabbed the enforcers, hoisting them into the air. The high-tech armor crumpled like paper. "Wait! Wait!" The leader screamed. "We're under the protection of the V's. You kill us, and you're at war with the most powerful." "I have been at war since the Crusades, boy," Alucard whispered. He pointed a finger at the man's chest. "And I have never found a powerful being who didn't scream like a pig when I peeled back the skin." With a flick of his wrist, Alucard commanded the shadows to contract. It wasn't a quick death. The I.M.P. crew watched in horrified fascination as the enforcers were literally folded into themselves, their bones snapping in a rhythmic percussion until they were nothing but compact spheres of meat and metal. Then, the shadows simply swallowed them. Alucard turned back to Blitzo, who was now holding a small, vibrating camera phone. "Did you get that, Luna?" Blitzo whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of terror and awe. "Every frame," the hellhound replied, her eyes wide. "That's going to get 1 billion views before the sun, whatever that giant clock does." "Good," Alucard said, walking past them toward the mouth of the alley. "Post it. Broadcast it to every corner of this neon cage. Tell your overlords that the night has finally arrived in hell. And I am very, very hungry." He paused at the edge of the street, looking up at the massive Vox-Tech billboards that dominated the skyline. On the screen, a grinning television-headed demon was selling soul insurance. Alucard's reflection appeared in the glass of a nearby shop window, but he wasn't alone. Standing behind his reflection was the faint, static-drenched image of a man in red pinstripes, watching him from the other side of the airwaves. Alucard smirked at the reflection. "I see you, little radio. I hope you're more entertaining than these toys." As he stepped out into the main thoroughfare of Pentagram City, the crowd of sinners parted like the Red Sea. They didn't know who he was, but their instincts, the primal, buried fears of the mortals they once were, told them that a true apex predator had just entered the exhibit. Far above, in the pristine, white offices of the embassy, an exorcist angel paused while sharpening her spear. She felt a ripple in the fabric of the pride ring, something that felt less like a demon and more like a cold, ancient judgment. She looked down at the city, her halo flickering. The extermination was still months away, but for the first time in millennia, the hunters felt like they were being watched. The air in Pentagram City usually hummed with the chaotic vibration of 1 billion sins, a cacophony of sirens, screams, and the rhythmic thumping of industrial-grade despair. But as Alucard walked down the center of the main thoroughfare, that noise began to warp. It didn't just go silent. It transformed into the warm, crackling hiss of an old vinyl record spinning in a room with no windows. The smell of the street, the sulfur and the exhaust, was suddenly cut by the sharp, nostalgic scent of swamp water and expensive jambalaya. Alucard stopped. He stood beneath a flickering street lamp that cast his shadow long and jagged across the cracked pavement. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He could feel the eyes on him, not the frightened, voyeuristic eyes of the sinners hiding in the gutters, but a pair of eyes that held the weight of a different kind of darkness. "Salutations! What a truly magnificent performance!" The voice was filtered through a layer of 1920s radio static, bright and theatrical, yet carrying an undertone of something ancient and hungry. From the shadows of a nearby jazz club stepped a figure that was as much a contradiction as Alucard himself. He was tall, thin as a rail, and dressed in a pinstriped red suit that matched the hue of his deer-like ears. He held a cane topped with a vintage microphone, and his smile, wide, jagged, and terrifyingly permanent, seemed to glow in the dim light. "I must say, Alastor, the radio demon," continued as he twirled his cane, "it's been quite some time since someone made such a definitive statement in my neighborhood. Erasing a soul? My. Even the exorcists usually have the decency to use a spear. You, on the other hand, seem to have brought a cannon to a knife fight." Alucard slowly turned, his orange spectacles catching the light of the radio demon's glowing eyes. He looked Alastor up and down, noting the way the shadows behind the deer demon seemed to writhe with their own independent malice. A radio, Alucard mused, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that seemed to challenge the static in the air. I haven't heard a broadcast like yours since London was burning. You have a peculiar scent for a demon. You smell of human souls, yes, but there is something else, something tethered. The static around Alastor flared for a microsecond, a sharp scree of interference that indicated a hit. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed into radio dial slits. Sharp? Very sharp. They do say the old ways are the best, don't they? I am Alastor, and you, my monochromatic friend, are the talk of the town. That little I.M.P video is currently tearing through the V's servers like a virus in a nursery. The I.M.Ps are children playing with matches, Alucard said, stepping closer. The temperature in the street began to plummet. And you? You are the one they tell stories about to keep the children quiet. The radio demon who rose from the ranks of the damned to topple overlords. A fascinating upward trajectory. Oh, I do enjoy a good success story, Alastor chuckled, his voice echoing from speakers that weren't there. But hell is a delicate ecosystem. We have our rules, our hierarchies, our little dramas. You've walked in and started breaking the furniture. That tends to make the landlords nervous. I am not interested in your furniture, Alucard replied, his red duster billowing as if caught in a phantom gale. And I have never been a good tenant. I am looking for something this world seems to lack. A purpose beyond the petty accumulation of followers and influence. I am looking for a monster worth the effort of killing. Alastor's head tilted at a sharp, unnatural angle, his neck snapping with the sound of a dry branch. The shadows beneath his feet erupted, manifesting as giant, spindly deer shadows with glowing green eyes. The static in the air became a roar, drowning out the distant sounds of the city. A monster? Alastor's voice dropped an octave, becoming a distorted, demonic growl. You've come to the right place, stranger, but be careful what you wish for. Some things in this pit don't just stay dead because you have a big gun and a fancy coat. In an instant, the radio silence was shattered. Alastor lunged, not with a physical strike, but with a wave of shadow tendrils that tore through the asphalt like black lightning. Alucard didn't move to dodge. He simply opened his arms, allowing the shadows to impale him. They ripped through his chest, his shoulders, and his throat, pinning him to the brick wall of a nearby building. Alastor drifted forward, his hooves clicking softly on the ground. A bit disappointing. I expected a bit more resistance. Alucard's head hung low, blood dripping from his lips onto his white cravat. Then he began to laugh. It started as a wheeze and built into a deep, guttural roar that shook the very foundations of the street. Resistance. Alucard looked up, his eyes glowing with a feral crimson light. You don't understand, little radio. This isn't a fight. It's an appetite. The blood dripping from Alucard's wounds didn't fall to the ground. It began to flow up the shadow tendrils, turning the green-black energy into a dark, pulsing red. The holes in Alucard's body didn't just heal, they expanded, revealing a swirling vortex of screaming faces and lidless eyes within his torso. Restraint level 1. Continuing, Alucard whispered. A massive black hound's head, the Baskerville, burst from Alucard's shadow, its jaws wide enough to swallow a car. It snapped at Alastor, who barely managed to teleport away in a flurry of static and deer fur. The hound tore through the building Alucard had been pinned to, reducing the brick and mortar to dust in a single bite. Alastor reappeared atop a nearby billboard, his chest heaving slightly, his permanent grin now strained. He looked down at the street, which was now a sea of shifting, multi-eyed darkness. Alucard stood in the center of it, his body flickering between a solid form and a mass of black smoke. Well now, Alastor called out, his voice shaking with a mix of genuine thrill and calculated caution. That is a trick. You don't just have souls. You are a legion. How wonderfully macabre. Alucard raised the jackal, the massive black sister gun to the cashel, and aimed it at the billboard. You talk too much, demon. In my world, the monsters knew when to stop smiling and start begging. And in this world, Alastor replied, his image flickering like a dying television screen. We never stopped the show, but I think we've had enough of a preamble for one evening. You're headed toward the hotel, aren't you? Seeking the princess and her little rehabilitation project? Alucard lowered the gun, the shadows slowly receding back into his coat. The girl who thinks she can turn lead into gold? Yes. I want to see if her hope has any more substance than your fame. Then by all means, don't let me keep you. Alastor vanished into a pillar of green fire and static, his voice lingering in the air like a ghostly recording. I'll be watching, stranger. This season of hell just got a lot more interesting. Alucard stood alone in the ruined street. He adjusted his hat and replaced his spectacles, the orange glow returning to his eyes. He didn't care about Alastor's warnings, or the delicate ecosystem of the Pride Ring. He had seen the radio demon's power. It was vast, ancient, and rooted in the very fabric of this realm. But it was still a power that relied on an audience. Alucard had no audience. He was a secret kept by the grave. He turned his gaze toward the horizon, where the neon Hazbin Hotel sign flickered against the red sky. He began to walk again, his boots clicking rhythmically on the pavement. He didn't know if Charlie Morningstar could truly redeem anyone, but he was curious to see what her brand of light would do to a shadow as deep as his. As he disappeared into the fog, a single, black feather drifted down from the sky, landing in a puddle of blood. Far above, the gears of the great clock turned. The extermination was coming, and for the first time in history, the demons weren't the only things that should be afraid of the dark. The walk was short, but the silence Alucard left in his wake was long. Pentagram City usually filled any vacuum with immediate, screeching depravity, but tonight the streets felt hollowed out. As the tall, Gothic spire of the Hazbin Hotel loomed ahead, a crooked, colorful monument to delusion, Alucard found himself standing before the heavy oak doors. It was a building that looked like it had been stitched together from a dozen different fever dreams, glowing with a desperate neon-pink warmth that felt like a slap in the face to the cold, gray reality of the grave. He didn't knock. He simply stood there, his presence pressing against the wood, until the air itself seemed to thin. Within seconds, the door swung open with a burst of frantic energy. "Welcome to the Hazbin Ho." Charlie Morningstar froze. The Princess of Hell, usually a whirlwind of sparkles and misplaced optimism, came to a grinding halt. She was used to seeing monsters. She lived with a spider demon, a cyclops, and a winged cat who drank cheap hooch for breakfast. But the man standing on her doorstep wasn't just a monster. He was a stillness. He was a void in a red coat, his orange spectacles reflecting the flickering light of the hotel's lobby, in a way that made her feel like she was looking into the eyes of a predator that had been waiting for her since the dawn of time. "Oh," Charlie whispered, her hand still frozen in a welcoming gesture. Hi, I'm Charlie. Are you here for a room? Or to, find a better way? A new path? Redemption?" Alucard tilted his head. He looked past her into the lobby, where a white-haired woman with an X over her eye was already gripping a spear made of angelic steel, her knuckles white. Beyond her, a pink and white spider demon reclined on a sofa, and a grumpy-looking cat sat behind a bar. It was a menagerie of the broken. "Redemption," Alucard repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "A fascinating concept. You wish to take the dregs of this pit, the murderers, the rapists, the small-minded tyrants, and polish them until they sparkle like the choir of heaven. Tell me, princess, do you truly believe that a change of heart can undo a century of blood?" I believe everyone has a spark," Charlie said, her voice regaining some of its frantic strength as she stepped back to let him in. "It's about the work, the choice to be better." "Charlie, get back," Vaggie hissed, stepping between the princess and the stranger. Her spear was leveled at Alucard's chest, the silver blade humming with a holy resonance that Alucard found mildly nostalgic. "I don't know who you are, Count, but you smell like a cemetery that's been on fire for 3 days. You're not a sinner. You're not hellborn. What the hell are you?" Alucard ignored the spear. He walked past Vaggie as if she were a ghost, his red duster sweeping across the carpet. He stopped at the bar, looking at Husk. The winged cat stared back, his eyes narrowing. "You," Alucard said, gesturing to the bottle of cheap rye in Husk's hand. "Pour me a glass." "I find the local atmosphere requires a certain level of chemical intervention. I don't serve freelancers," Husk growled, though his ears twitched in a way that betrayed his terror. "Especially ones that look like they're about to start a war." "Oh, lighten up, Whiskers," Angel Dust piped up from the sofa, leaning back with forearms crossed. He's just got that edgy Victorian vibe. Though I gotta say, honey, the hat? A bit much. Unless you're hiding a second, smaller hat under there. Alucard turned his gaze to the spider demon. The pressure in the room shifted. It wasn't a physical blow, but angel dust suddenly felt his lungs seize. The playful smirk vanished from his face as he realized that the man in the red coat wasn't just edgy. He was a tidal wave of souls, a billion deaths compressed into a single, elegant form. You are a creature of appetites, Alucard said to Angel, his voice a low, terrifying purr. You trade your body for safety and your soul for a moment of numbness. You are exactly what I expected to find in this nursery, a victim who has learned to love his cage. Hey! Charlie stepped forward, her face turning a darker shade of red, her horns beginning to sprout from her forehead. We don't talk to guests like that here. This is a place of support. If you're just here to be a bully, you can leave. Alucard looked at the princess. For a moment, he saw the flicker of her true power, the daughter of Lucifer, the heir to the throne. It was there, buried under layers of musical theater enthusiasm and naive hope. It was the only thing in the room that didn't bore him. I am not a bully, child, Alucard said, his tone softening just enough to be chilling. I am a mirror. I have spent 5 centuries watching humans become monsters, and monsters trying to become gods. Your redemption is a parlor trick. You seek to change their actions, but you cannot change their essence. A wolf who learns to eat grass is still a wolf. He is simply a wolf who is very, very hungry. And what about you? Vaggie demanded, her spear still leveled. Are you a wolf? I am the bird of Hermes, Alucard replied, finally looking at her. And I have eaten my wings. I have accepted my nature. I do not seek redemption because I am exactly what I was meant to be. A weapon. A weapon for who? A voice crackled from the shadows of the mezzanine. Alastor drifted down the stairs, his cane clicking against the floor. He looked at Alucard with a grin that suggested they were both sharing a very private, very bloody joke. He's a weapon for anyone with the will to hold the hilt, my dear Vaggie. But currently, it seems he's a weapon without a master. A stray dog in the devil's backyard. Alastor, Charlie sighed, her demonic features receding. You know him? We've had a brief exchange of philosophies, Alastor chirped, coming to stand beside Alucard. The two red-clad figures stood side by side, creating a visual harmony of terror that made the rest of the room feel small. He's quite the conversationalist, although his method of ending an argument is a bit more permanent than yours, Charlie. He killed someone, didn't he? Vaggie asked, her eyes darting between the two. The video on Voxtagram, that was him. He didn't just kill him, Angel Dust whispered, his voice uncharacteristically small. He erased him. I saw the footage. There wasn't even a ghost left. Charlie's face fell. Is that true? Did you take a life here? Alucard picked up the glass Husk had finally shakily poured for him. He drained it in one gulp. I did not take a life. I ended a tragedy. Your sinners are a plague of mediocrity. They live forever, because they have nothing worth dying for. I gave that one a moment of genuine consequence. He turned back to Charlie, his orange spectacles glowing. I will stay in your hotel, princess. Not because I seek your cure, but because I wish to see the moment your light finally burns out. I want to see what happens to your hope when it realizes that some things in this dark were never meant to be fixed. Charlie looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of horror and a stubborn, heartbreaking defiance. Fine, you can stay. Room 666 is open. But if you hurt anyone here, if you use those guns inside these walls, I don't care how many souls you have inside you, you'll find out why I'm the princess of hell. Alucard smiled. It wasn't the wide, jagged grin of Alastor or the playful smirk of Angel Dust. It was a cold, thin line of recognition. I look forward to it, Morningstar, Alucard whispered. As he turned to follow a trembling razzle and dazzle up the stairs, the shadows in the lobby seemed to stretch and pull, following him like a loyal pack of hounds. Alastor watched him go, his eyes flickering with green radio dials. Vaggie lowered her spear, but her hand didn't stop shaking. In the quiet that followed, the sound of the great clock outside seemed louder than ever. The extermination was coming. But as Alucard reached the top of the stairs and looked back down at the happy hotel, it was clear that the angels were the least of their problems. The king of vampires had found a new throne, and he was just getting started. In the sapphire blue heart of Voxtech Tower, The air hummed with the electric tension of a failing stock market. Screens, thousands of them, ranging from handheld tablets to wall-sized monitors, flickered with the same looped footage. A man in a red duster vaporizing a sinner with a silver-plated hand cannon. The algorithm was screaming. On Helter, the hashtag Red Death was trending higher than Angel Dust's latest scandal, or the upcoming extermination countdown. For Vox, the overlord of media, this wasn't just a security breach, it was a brand crisis. It's not just the kill, Val. Look at the engagement, Vox shouted, his screen face glitching into a jagged pattern of static as he paced the glass floor. Zero production value, no sponsorship, and it's getting more views than our last 3 Soul contracts combined. This glitch in the system is making us look like analog garbage. Valentino, leaning back in a throne of quilted velvet, exhaled a cloud of pink, pheromone-laced smoke. His multiple arms twitched with irritation. So he's a little flashy, so what? He's probably just another arrogant prick who found a shiny toy. Send a couple of the boys, break his legs, and bring him here. I could use a new silent type for the late-night features. That coat would look delicious on a rack. He's not a silent type, you vapid moth, Velvet snapped, her thumbs flying across her phone as she curated a smear campaign in real time. He's a nightmare. I've run his image through every database in the Pride, Greed, and Envy rings. He doesn't exist. No birth record, no death certificate, no social footprint. He's a total blank, which makes him the most dangerous thing in this city. He's authentic. Then we make him an offer, Vox said, his voice smoothing out into a corporate baritone as his screen displayed a graph of projected earnings. Every monster has a price, whether it's power, blood, or just a bigger stage. We invite him to the tower. We brand him as the V's new enforcer. If he says no, well, we own the satellites. We'll see how well he regenerates when I drop a localized lightning strike on his head. The invitation arrived at the Hazbin Hotel, not by mail, but by a fleet of golden drones that hovered outside the lobby windows, projecting a holographic image of Vox's grinning face. It was a summons disguised as a VIP gala. Charlie had tried to forbid it. It's a trap, obviously. The V's don't do galas unless they're planning to soul-bind everyone in the room. Alucard, however, had simply adjusted his gloves, a thin, predatory smile touching his lips. A tower of glass and light, a temple built to vanity. It sounds like a lovely place to watch something break. Now, Alucard stood in the penthouse of Voxtech Tower. The room was a masterpiece of corporate excess. All chrome, neon, and high-fidelity sound. The V's were waiting. Vox stood at a bar made of solid data crystals. Velvet was perched on a sleek, minimalist sofa, and Valentino was draped over a chaise lounge, his long, spindly legs crossed provocatively. Welcome to the future of hell, Vox exclaimed, spreading his arms wide. I'm Vox, but you probably knew that. This is Velvet, the backbone of the social fabric, and Valentino, well, he's the flavor. We saw your little performance in the street. Very retro, very visceral. We think you've got a real future here if you play your cards right. Alucard walked to the center of the room, his boots silent on the glass floor. He didn't look at the decor. He looked at the 3 overlords with the same detached clinical interest a biologist might show a particularly colorful fungus. You are the masters of this era? Alucard asked, his voice low and vibrating. A television, a tailor, and a pimp. How efficient. You have turned the suffering of the damned into a subscription service. It's called innovation, darling, Velvet said, not looking up from her screen. People want to be seen. They want to be part of the trend. You're the trend right now. We can make that permanent. Imagine, your face on every screen in hell. Your Red Death as a licensed brand. We can give you more influence than Lucifer himself. Valentino stood up, his height nearly matching Alucard's. He drifted closer, the pink smoke from his cigar wrapping around Alucard's shoulders like a greasy caress. And the perks, Poppy. I have a stable of the most beautiful souls in the rings. Anything you want to taste, anything you want to break, it's all yours. Just sign the line. He reached out a gloved hand, intending to pat Alucard's cheek. The movement was too fast for the human eye, and nearly too fast for the overlords. In a flicker of red and black, Alucard's hand was around Valentino's wrist. The sound of chitinous bone cracking echoed in the high-tech silence. Do not touch me, Moth, Alucard whispered, his voice dropping into a register that made the glass walls vibrate. I have killed men for less than the smell of your breath. Hey, Vox's screen flashed a warning yellow. Let him go. We're trying to be professional here. Alucard didn't let go. Instead, he twisted. Valentino let out a high-pitched, screeching hiss as he was forced to his knees. The pink smoke in the room suddenly turned a muddy, sickly gray as Alucard's shadow began to bleed across the floor, tendrils of darkness reaching up to lick at the neon lights. You speak of influence and brands, Alucard said, looking at Vox. You think that because you can flicker on a screen you have power, but I have seen the rise and fall of empires that were built on stone, not signals. You are nothing but light and noise. If I turn off the power, what are you? I am the power. Vox roared. The lights in the tower flared to a blinding intensity. High-frequency waves began to pulse through the room, designed to scramble the nervous systems of any demon. I own every wire in this city. I can unmake you atom by atom. Alucard laughed. It wasn't a taunt. It was a genuine, terrifying peal of mirth. He released Valentino, who scrambled back, clutching his shattered wrist. Alucard then removed his spectacles, his eyes glowing like dying stars. Then show me, television, Alucard challenged. Show me your power. Show me how your wires handle a soul that has lived for 500 years without a single like. He didn't draw a gun. He simply stood there as Vox unleashed a torrent of blue electricity from his hands. The current hit Alucard with enough force to vaporize a lesser demon, turning the air into a shimmering haze of ozone. Vox pushed harder, his screen face contorting with the effort, his processors overclocking until smoke began to drift from his seams. When the glare subsided, Alucard was still standing. His red coat was slightly charred, and his skin was blackened in places. But as the V's watched in horror, the wounds didn't just heal, they were consumed by a swarm of darkness that knitted the flesh back together in seconds. Is that the extent of your innovation? Alucard asked, stepping forward. It tickles. It tastes of copper and desperation. What are you? Velvet whispered, her phone slipping from her fingers. I am the answer to the question you were too arrogant to ask, Alucard said. He raised his hand, and the shadows in the room suddenly lunged. They didn't attack the V's, they attacked the screens. One by one, the monitors in the penthouse shattered, not from physical force, but from the sheer, oppressive weight of Alucard's presence. The data crystals cracked. The neon tubes burst. In seconds, the penthouse was plunged into a cold, suffocating darkness, lit only by the crimson glow of Alucard's eyes and the flickering, terrified static of Vox's face. You are not monsters, Alucard said, standing over them as they cowered in the ruins of their luxury. You are parasites. You feed on the attention of the weak because you have no strength of your own. If I see your drones near the hotel again, I will not just break your toys, I will eat your followers, until there is no one left to remember your names. He turned and walked toward the elevator, his boots crunching on the glass. As he stepped inside, he looked back at the three broken overlords. The night is older than the screen, boy, Alucard said to Vox, and it is much, much hungrier. As the elevator doors closed, the V's were left in the silence of their own irrelevance. Outside, in the streets of Pentagram City, the neon lights flickered for a moment, a momentary brownout that caused a ripple of unease through the damned. The King of Vampires hadn't just rejected an endorsement deal, he had declared war on the very idea of the modern hell. The Hazbin Hotel was a nursery, and Alucard was starting to find the quiet of his room 666 intolerable. For a few days, he had played the role of the silent guest, watching as Charlie sang her songs of hope, and Angel Dust cracked jokes to hide the shivering of his soul. He watched Vaggie sharpen her spear, and Husk drown his memories in cheap rye. It was a domesticity that felt like a shroud. To Alucard, who had spent centuries in the service of a bloodline, and decades in the silence of the void, this hell felt less like a pit of eternal torment, and more like a high school cafeteria with better pyrotechnics. He needed to breathe. And for Alucard, breathing required the scent of ozone, the copper tang of fresh blood, and the sound of a god realizing they were mortal. He left the hotel at midnight, his red duster trailing behind him like a river of gore. He didn't head for the neon districts of the V's or the theatrical shadows of Alastor's territory. Instead, he sought the industrial heart of the Pride Ring, the soul markets. Here, the sinner brokers operated, lesser overlords who didn't care about fame or screens, only the cold, hard currency of soul contracts. They were the ones who kept the gears of the city turning by grinding the weak into power. He stopped in front of a massive, windowless fortress of black iron. Above the door was a flickering sign, the Exchange. Inside, thousands of sinners were held in rows of spectral cages, their essences being slowly drained to fuel the luxury of the elite. Halt! A guard, a brute of a demon with 4 arms and a face like a cracked anvil, stepped into his path. He brandished a heavy mace glowing with a sickly green fire. This is private property of the Iron Syndicate. Move along, Redcap, or you'll end up in a jar. Alucard didn't stop. He didn't even look at the guard. He simply walked through him. Not around him, through him. His body dissolved into a swarm of black shadows and red eyes, passing through the demon's physical form. The guard let out a choked, wet sound as his internal organs were momentarily displaced by the freezing, ancient darkness of Alucard's essence. He collapsed, his body turning to ash before he hit the ground. Alucard reformed on the other side of the door, his boots clicking on the cold iron floor. Private property, he mused, his voice echoing in the cavernous hallway. A charming delusion. Everything in this world is a lease, and I am the one who has come to collect the arrears. He raised his hand, the Cromwell seal on his glove glowing with a blinding, sinister light. Releasing restraint level 1. The fortress didn't just break, it screamed. The shadows of the building itself began to twist, turning into jagged, ebony claws that tore through the walls. From Alucard's shadow, the black hounds emerged. Not just one, but a pack of them, their bodies made of shifting smoke and thousands of lidless, weeping eyes. They tore through the Syndicate's enforcers like wolves through paper. In the center of the facility stood the broker, a spindly, spider-like demon named Malphas, who wore a bespoke suit made of woven hair. He sat behind a desk of carved bone, watching the carnage on a dozen monitors. "What is this?" Malphas shrieked, his many eyes darting in terror. "I pay my tribute to the Morning Stars. I am protected. You can't just walk in here and destroy my inventory." Alucard entered the office, the jackal in his left hand, the casul in his right. He didn't look like a man. He looked like a catastrophic event wearing a hat. The air around him was thick with the souls of the millions he had consumed over 5 centuries, a weight that Malphas felt as a physical pressure crushing his chest. "Your inventory consists of souls that have forgotten how to scream," Alucard said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "You have taken the only thing of value these wretches had, their suffering, and turned it into a ledger. It is boring, it is petty, and it is an insult to the dignity of the damned." "I'll give you whatever you want," Malphas scrambled back, his spindly legs clicking against the floor. "You want power? I have contracts. I can give you the service of 10,000 sinners. I can make you an overlord by morning." Alucard paused, his orange spectacles catching the green light of the soul vats. "An overlord? You wish to give me a title in a kingdom of ash? Tell me, broker, if I eat you, do I get your contracts as well? Or do they simply vanish when the source is extinguished?" "Wait, no!" Bang. The jackal spoke once. The oversized 13mm explosive round didn't just kill Malphas, it shattered the reality of the room. The broker's upper body disappeared in a cloud of purple mist and scorched silk. The soul vats behind him, sensitive to the sudden release of such violent energy, began to crack and shatter. Thousands of sinners' essences poured out, a shimmering, chaotic cloud of blue and white light. They didn't flee, they hovered, drawn to the massive, swirling vortex of darkness that was Alucard's presence. "Go," Alucard whispered, his voice surprisingly gentle, yet still carrying the authority of a king. "Return to the streets. Be the monsters you were meant to be. Do not let yourselves be weighed and measured by these insects again." As the souls fled into the night, Alucard stood in the ruins of the fortress. He felt a presence behind him, a soft, frantic fluttering of wings and the smell of cinnamon and scorched sugar. "What have you done?" Charlie stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with horror, her hands trembling. Vaggie was beside her, her spear leveled, though she looked more terrified than aggressive. Behind them, the I.M.P. crew watched from the shadows, Blitzo holding a bag of popcorn with an expression of pure, unadulterated glee. "I have performed a public service, Princess," Alucard said, holstering his weapons. "I have removed a parasite from your father's garden. Isn't this what you wanted? For sinners to be free to choose their path. Well, they are free now. Let us see if they choose your songs or the gutters." "You murdered him!" Charlie cried, stepping over the charred remains of a guard. "He was a person. He had a life. He could have changed." "He was a clerk," Alucard corrected, turning to face her. "He dealt in the commodification of existence. He was a creature of such profound lack of imagination that his very presence was an act of blasphemy. I did not murder him, Morningstar. I edited him out of the script." "You're not a hero," Vaggie spat, her spear tip glowing. "You're just another psycho with a god complex. You're making things worse. The power vacuum you just created is going to start a war." Alucard smiled, a thin, razor-sharp line. "A war. Finally. Something with a bit of weight. Something that doesn't involve a catchy musical number." He walked toward them, the shadows of the broken building bowing as he passed. "You seek to save these people, Charlie, but you don't understand that to save something, you must first understand what it is. These are not misguided souls. They are the damned. And the damned do not need a teacher. They need a master." "I'm not going to let you do this," Charlie said, her voice dropping into a demonic register, her eyes glowing with the true fire of the Morningstar lineage. "I'm the Princess of Hell. This is my home. You don't get to come in here and play judge, jury, and executioner." Alucard stopped inches from her face. He didn't flinch at her power. He didn't even look impressed. He looked hungry. "Then stop me," he whispered. "Show me that the daughter of the fallen angel has more than just hope. Show me the fire that burned the heavens. Because if you do not, I will continue to prune this garden until there is nothing left but the soil." He brushed past her, his red coat snapping in a wind that shouldn't have been there. As he walked out into the red light of the Pride Ring, the news of the Syndicate's fall was already spreading through the static. The overlords were waking up. The Red Death was no longer just a viral video. He was a threat to the very economy of their existence. In the distance, the great clock ticked. The extermination was coming. But tonight, for the first time in millennia, the sinners of Pentagram City weren't looking at the sky. They were looking at the man in the red coat, and they were wondering if the angels might actually be the merciful ones. The great clock of Pentagram City didn't chime. It screamed. When the countdown reached 0, the sky above the Pride Ring didn't just darken, it fractured. A titanic halo of jagged white light manifested in the atmosphere, casting a cold, sterile glare over the neon filth of the city. This was the extermination, the yearly ritual of divine population control. In the Helluverse, this was the day the music stopped and the slaughter began. Thousands of exorcists, winged silhouettes in porcelain masks, poured through the rift, brandishing spears of angelic steel that hummed with a frequency designed to unmake the damned. Usually, the streets were empty on this day. The sinners who could afford it hid in bunkers, the rest huddled in the darkest corners of the gutters, praying to a god they had spent their lives mocking. But today, in the center of the main thoroughfare, right beneath the shadow of the Hazbin Hotel, there was a chair. It was a high-backed Victorian armchair of velvet and mahogany, looking utterly absurd in the middle of the cracked asphalt, and in that chair sat Alucard. He was reading a book, his legs crossed, a glass of dark, viscous liquid resting on a small side table. He didn't look up when the first wave of exorcists touched down, their boots clattering on the pavement like a hail of stones. He didn't flinch when their leader, Adam, the first man and current commander of the heavenly host, descended in a burst of golden light and heavy metal guitar riffs. "Holy shit, Loot! Look at this guy!" Adam barked, his voice booming through his mask speakers. He touched down 10 feet from Alucard, his golden guitar axe slung over his shoulder. "Is this a joke? Is it dressed like a douche day? Hey, Red! Did you miss the memo? It's stabby time! Get on your knees so we can make this quick. I've got a buffet waiting back in the embassy." Alucard slowly turned a page. He took a sip of his drink. Only then did he look up, his orange spectacles catching the divine radiance of the sky. "I have met many angels in my time," Alucard said, his voice cutting through the ambient roar of the extermination like a razor. "Most were silent, some were terrifying, but you are the first one that sounds like a frustrated teenager in a garage band." Adam's mask flickered with a digital scowl. "Oh, we got a funny guy. I love the funny ones. They pop so much louder when you spear 'em. Loot, take his head." "I want that hat for my collection." Loot, the high-ranking lieutenant with a face of frozen, murderous zeal, didn't hesitate. She lunged, her wings propelling her forward at subsonic speeds. Her spear, a weapon capable of erasing a soul from existence, aimed straight for Alucard's throat. Alucard didn't move. The spear struck. It didn't just pierce him. It drove through his neck and out the back of the chair, pinning him to the velvet. Target neutralized, Lute spat, her voice a cold rasp. A bit quick, wasn't it? Alucard's voice came from the chair, despite the spear through his windpipe. His eyes hadn't closed. Instead, they began to multiply. Hundreds of tiny red eyes manifested in the fabric of his red duster, blinking in unison. You call this a judgment? This is a chore. You are not warriors of God. You are janitors with wings. The shadow beneath the chair erupted. It didn't just expand, it became a vertical abyss. A massive black hound's head, the Baskerville, shot upward, catching Lute in its jaws. The exorcist let out a strangled cry as she was dragged into the darkness. Lute! Adam roared, his axe guitar erupting in a blast of holy light. He swung the weapon, sending a wave of golden energy that leveled the surrounding buildings and incinerated the armchair. When the dust settled, Alucard was standing 20 feet away, his coat fluttering, his head tilted at a nauseating angle. He gripped the cassol in his right hand. Your holy light tastes of ozone and ego, he mused. It lacks the weight of true divinity. Tell me, first man, have you ever actually seen the face of the one you claim to serve? Or are you just the loudest dog in the yard? I'm the fucking boss, Adam screamed, his wings flaring as he took to the air. I'm the original. I'm the gold standard. You're just another piece of trash for the bin. Adam unleashed a barrage of holy energy, turning the street into a series of craters. From the sky, dozens of exorcists dove down, their spears glowing. Alucard didn't run. He began to laugh, a deep, booming sound that drowned out Adam's guitar. Releasing restraint level 1, Alucard whispered. The Cromwell seals on his gloves burst. The Pride Ring had seen power. It had seen Alastor's radio voodoo and Lucifer's celestial fire, but it had never seen this. Alucard's body didn't just change. It dissolved. He became a localized storm of blood and shadow. Thousands of black bats swarmed the exorcists, clogging their wings, while shadowhounds tore through the air, dragging angels from the sky. Alucard manifested mid-air behind an exorcist, his hand plunging through the angel's chest. He didn't just kill her, he absorbed her. The white light of her essence was pulled into his body, turning his red coat a shimmering, ghostly white for a split second before the darkness reclaimed it. He's eating them? Vaggie screamed from the balcony of the Hazbin Hotel, her own spear clutched tight. He's actually consuming their souls! That's impossible. Angelic essence is supposed to be poison to demons. He's not a demon, Charlie whispered, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and terror. He's a paradox. He's a man who became a monster to protect the light, and now, he's just the hunger. Back in the street, Adam was losing his mind. He swung his axe with desperate, wild fury, but every time he struck Alucard, the vampire simply dissolved into bats or smoke, reforming a second later with a mocking grin. What are you? Adam shrieked. His mask cracked, revealing a face twisted by narcissistic rage. I'm the first man. You can't kill me. I'm a god in this shithole. Alucard appeared inches from Adam's face, his orange lenses glowing with a cold, terrifying clarity. You are a man who has lived too long in a dream of your own making, Alucard said. He raised the jackal, the black barrel pressing against Adam's chin. I'm a man who died 5 centuries ago and has been awake ever since. You call this an extermination? I'll show you a crusade. Alucard pulled the trigger. The 13mm explosive round, blessed by a church that no longer existed and tipped with silver from a dead world, detonated. Adam didn't die. His status as a primal soul was too strong, but he was blasted backward through 3 buildings, his golden armor shattered, his ego hemorrhaging more than his body. The exorcist army wavered. For the first time in the history of hell, the hunters were being hunted. The white-masked killers looked at the red-clad monster in the center of the street and saw something they hadn't felt in an eternity. Fear. Alucard stood amidst the golden blood and black feathers, his duster billowing. He didn't look at the fleeing angels. He looked at the sky, at the massive portal of heaven. Is that all? He called out, his voice echoing through the rift. Is this the best the kingdom of light can send to cull the darkness? Send me someone who knows the value of a soul. Send me a real warrior, or close your gates and admit that the night belongs to me." The portal didn't answer. Slowly, the exorcists retreated, dragging their wounded back into the light. The great clock ticked forward. The extermination had ended early, not because the quota had been met, but because the predator had proven too dangerous for the prey. As the light faded, and the familiar red glow of hell returned, Alucard turned back toward the hotel. He adjusted his hat, the blood of angels staining his gloves, a brilliant, shimmering gold. He had survived the judgment of heaven, and in doing so, he had proven the ultimate truth of the Helliverse. In a world of false heroes and corporate monsters, the only thing that mattered was the size of the teeth. The aftermath of the extermination didn't bring the usual somber silence to Pentagram City. Instead, a frantic, vibrating energy hummed through the air. On every screen, Vox was desperately trying to spin the narrative, his face flickering with frantic updates about unauthorized interference and weaponized anomalies. In the Hazbin Hotel, Charlie sat on the floor of the lobby, her head in her hands. She had wanted to save souls from the spear, but she hadn't expected someone to simply eat the spear wielders. The hierarchy of hell, a system of power that had remained stagnant for 10,000 years, wasn't just cracking, it was being ground into dust by a pair of leather boots. Alucard didn't return to his room. He stood on the roof of the hotel, looking out over the sprawling, neon-lit expanse of the Pride Ring. To him, this city looked like a festering wound that refused to scab over. It was too loud, too bright, and entirely too crowded with the ghosts of the mediocre. He felt the weight of the souls within him, the millions he had spent 30 years killing off, just to return to a physical form. He was everywhere and nowhere, a Schrodinger's cat of the damned. And he was bored. "It's quite a view, isn't it?" Alastor appeared beside him, leaning on his microphone cane. The radio demon's shadow was dancing erratically against the roof's shingles, its eyes fixed on Alucard. A world of endless variety and spectacular failure. Though I must say, your performance against the first man has caused a bit of a stir. The overlords are holding an emergency meeting. Even Zestial is coming out of the woodwork. They're calling you a great devourer, quite the promotion. They are frightened of a man who can end their eternity, Alucard said, not looking at him. They have lived so long as gods that they have forgotten what it feels like to be prey. They believe that because they own a few thousand souls, they are masters of the dark. And you? Alastor's voice crackled with a playful static. What do you believe? Alucard turned. He removed his hat, letting the wind catch his long, raven hair. I believe that this world is too crowded. And I believe it is time to show your kings and overlords the difference between a shadow and a nightmare. Alucard stepped off the roof. He didn't fall, he plummeted like a stone, hitting the center of the street with enough force to shatter the pavement. He stood in the middle of a major intersection, surrounded by the flashing billboards of Vox Tech and the lurid neon of the porn studios. Thousands of sinners stopped and stared. "What's he doing?" Angel Dust asked, leaning out of a hotel window with a pair of binoculars. "He looks like he's posing for a goth album cover." "He's not posing," Vaggie whispered, her face pale. "Look at the seals." Alucard raised both hands. The Cromwell seals on his gloves didn't just glow. They began to bleed. The red lee lines spread up his arms, turning his skin into a map of ancient, occult geometry. Restriction level 0. Alucard's voice boomed, amplified not by radio waves, but by the collective screams of a million ghosts. The air in Pentagram City died. The temperature plummeted to a grave cold that made the sulfurous air turn to frost. Then, Alucard's body didn't just dissolve, it exploded outward in a tidal wave of blood. It wasn't a spray, it was an ocean. Crimson liquid poured from his sleeves, his chest, and his eyes, flooding the streets, filling the gutters, and rising up the sides of the buildings. From this sea of blood, things began to rise. First came the horses, skeletal, rotting chargers with fire in their eyes. Then came the riders, thousands of Wallachian knights in rusted plate armor, their lances tipped with the heads of their enemies. Then came the janissaries, the musketeers, the pikemen of the 15th century. Behind them followed the victims of London, thousands of shambling ghouls with hollow eyes and hungry maws. This was Alucard's true form. He wasn't just a vampire. He was a living history of slaughter, He was the king of a graveyard that spanned centuries. Holy fucking shit, Blitzo whispered from a nearby rooftop, his phone shaking as he recorded the spectacle. That's not an army. That's a whole-ass country. The army of the dead didn't just march. They consumed. They didn't care about soul contracts or overlord territories. They moved through the pride ring like a cleansing fire. Any sinner caught in the tide wasn't just killed. They were pulled down into the blood, their essence added to the legion. Alucard's past was literally eating Hell's present. Vox, watching from his tower, let out a scream of pure digital agony. No! My servers! My towers! He's flooding the lower levels with... Is that blood? Real? Organic blood? It's shorting out everything! Shut up, Vox! Velvet shouted, her eyes fixed on the window. Look at the street. Those things, they're impaling the enforcers. They're not even using weapons. They're the dark. In the center of the Crimson Sea, Alucard stood atop a mountain of his own, manifested dead. He wore his ancient armor, the blackened steel of Vlad III. A tattered red cape billowed behind him, and he held a massive broadsword that dripped with the lifeblood of a forgotten age. He no longer looked like a Victorian gentleman. He looked like the warlord of Wallachia. Come out! Alucard roared, his voice shaking the foundations of the Seven Rings. You who sit on thrones of neon and deceit, you who call yourselves the princes of darkness, come and meet a man who has lived in the mouth of the abyss for 500 years. Show me your hellish power. Show me why I shouldn't turn this entire realm into a monument to my boredom. The sky above the city began to warp. The red moon turned a sickly, bruised purple. From the highest spire of the city, the palace of the king, a silhouette emerged. It wasn't a monster of shadow or a man of static. It was a figure of elegant, terrifying grace, clad in white and gold, with wings that held the light of a fallen sun. Lucifer Morningstar, the king of hell, descended. He didn't look angry. He looked profoundly tired. He landed on a spire of ice that rose from Alucard's sea of blood, his cane clicking softly. You're making a mess of my city, Lucifer said, his voice quiet but carrying the authority of the first rebel. And you're scaring my daughter. I've spent 10,000 years trying to keep this circus from imploding, and you walk in and start the main event without a ticket. Alucard raised his sword, the edge gleaming with the reflected light of 1,000,000 lost souls. Your circus is a failure, Morningstar. It is a cage for the weak, run by the petty. I have come to see if the master of the pit is worth the stories they tell on the surface. Lucifer's eyes flared with a golden celestial fire. His hat tipped forward, shadowing his face. You're not from here. You don't belong to the system. That makes you a glitch. And usually when I find a glitch, Lucifer's form began to expand, his 6 wings unfurling to cover the sky. I delete it. The sea of blood surged. The army of the dead raised their spears. The king of vampires and the king of hell stood at the precipice of a war that would redefine the afterlife. And in the windows of the Hazbin Hotel, Charlie watched as her dream of redemption was swallowed by the red tide of a history that refused to stay buried. The collision between the king of hell and the lord of Wallachia was not a clash of swords, but a clash of realities. When Lucifer Morningstar moved, the laws of physics in the Pride Ring bent to accommodate his whims. When Alucard struck, the very concept of existence seemed to fray at the edges. Around them, the sea of blood churned, a swirling vortex of gore that had swallowed the streets of Pentagram City whole. From the windows of the Hazbin Hotel, the scene looked like the end of the world, or perhaps, the beginning of a much darker one. Lucifer didn't use a weapon at first. He simply snapped his fingers. A pillar of white celestial fire erupted from the center of the blood sea, incinerating thousands of Alucard's ghouls in a heartbeat. The fire was pure, a remnant of the light of creation that still burned within the fallen one. It didn't just burn flesh, it cauterized the spiritual essence of the dead, turning Alucard's legion into wisps of harmless steam. You're playing with very old toys, Vlad, Lucifer said, his voice echoing with the harmonic resonance of 1,000 trumpets. He drifted through the air, his white suit pristine despite the carnage around him. This army of yours, it's just a collection of failures. People who couldn't stay dead, led by a man who's too stubborn to admit he's a ghost. It's tacky. Alucard, standing atop his mountain of corpses, let out a laugh that sounded like the grinding of tectonic plates. He raised his broadsword, and the millions of eyes embedded in his armor all blinked at once. Tacky? You call the history of human struggle tacky, Morningstar? I am the sum total of every soul I have ever consumed. I am the weight of their sins, their hatred, and their will to survive. You? You are a king who hides in a palace of ducks and depression, because you cannot bear to look at the monsters you've sired. Alucard lunged. He didn't run. He blurred across the surface of the blood, his sword trailing a wake of black shadow. Lucifer met the strike with his cane, the small apple-topped wood holding back a blade that could cleave a tank in two. The shockwave of the impact shattered every window within 3 miles. The neon signs of the V's exploded, and the ground beneath the sea of blood cracked, sending tremors all the way down to the greed ring. "I'm not depressed," Lucifer hissed, his eyes glowing a lethal, blinding gold. "I'm bored. And you're just another loud, self-important threat that thinks they're the protagonist of a tragedy." "I've seen stars die, little vampire. I've seen the birth of every sin you hold so dear." Lucifer's form shifted, his 6 wings unfurled, expanding until they blotted out the red moon. His face elongated, his horns growing into crown-like spires of fire. He became a titan of celestial light and demonic fury. With a roar that shook the firmament, he unleashed a wave of golden energy that acted like a scythe, mowing down the Wallachian knights and the modern soldiers of Alucard's legion by the hundreds of thousands. But for every soul Lucifer incinerated, 10 more rose from the blood. This was the curse of level 0. Alucard was no longer a single target. He was the environment. He was the sea. He was the dead. Is that it? Alucard's voice came from the mouth of a rotting knight, then from a ghoul, then from the very air itself. "You burn the dead to feel alive? How pathetic. You are the king of lies, yet you cannot even lie to yourself. You hate this place. You hate these people. You want me to end it, don't you?" The Baskerville hound, now the size of a cathedral, lunged from the blood, its many-eyed head snapping at Lucifer's wings. Lucifer struck the beast with a bolt of pure light, blowing the hound's head apart, but the shadows simply reformed into 1,000 smaller, hungrier dogs. "I don't want you to end anything," Lucifer roared, his voice cracking with the strain of his own power. He began to manifest objects out of thin air, giant, serrated blades of angelic light that rained down like a meteor shower, impaling Alucard's army into the seabed of the Pride Ring. "I want you to leave. Go back to whatever hole you crawled out of. You're ruining the aesthetic. The aesthetic is a lie." Alucard manifested directly in front of Lucifer, his Vlad III armor scorched but intact. He grabbed Lucifer's throat with a gauntleted hand. The touch of the vampire was like a cold iron brand. "This world is a circus, because you are too cowardly to make it a kingdom. You allow these overlords to play with souls, because you are afraid of the responsibility of true judgment. You are not a king, Morningstar. You are a shut-in." Lucifer's face twisted in a snarl. He didn't pull away. Instead, he grabbed Alucard's wrist, and the golden fire of his touch began to melt the vampire's armor. "And what are you? A man who serves a mortal girl in a dusty basement? A slave to a bloodline that doesn't even exist anymore? You're a dog on a leash, Alucard. At least I broke my chains." The 2 kings locked in a struggle of pure willpower. The blood sea began to boil, the heat of Lucifer's divinity clashing with the absolute zero of Alucard's void. In the distance, the Hazbin hotel groaned under the pressure. Charlie stood on the balcony, her eyes streaming with tears, as she watched her father fight a man who represented everything she feared, a soul that was truly, utterly beyond her reach. "Stop it!" Charlie's voice was a small, desperate sound in the middle of the apocalypse. She tapped into her own power, her demon form manifesting as she leaped from the balcony. She didn't head for the kings, she headed for the center of the conflict, her own aura of pink and white light acting as a buffer against the carnage. "Dad! Alucard! Stop it! You're killing everyone!" She wasn't exaggerating. The collateral damage was catastrophic. The I.M.P. crew had been forced to retreat to the very edge of the ring, their van barely staying upright in the flooding blood. The V's tower was a smoking ruin. Thousands of sinners, caught between the golden fire and the black hounds, were being erased from existence. Alucard looked at Charlie, his orange eyes flickering through the visor of his helmet. He saw the girl who had offered him a room, the girl who believed in the impossible. For a microsecond, the warlord of Wallachia wavered. He saw the human in her, the same spark he had seen in Integra Helsing. It was a spark that required a monster to protect it. "Look at her, Morningstar," Alucard whispered, his voice returning to its low, baritone rasp. Look at the only thing in this pit worth a damn. She wants to be a hero, but heroes don't exist without villains. Alucard pushed Lucifer back, the force of the shove sending the King of Hell skidding across the air. Alucard lowered his sword, the sea of blood beginning to recede, pulling the army of the dead back into his shadow. He stood in the center of the ruined street, the red duster reforming over his blackened armor. "We are at a stalemate, King of Lies," Alucard said, his voice carrying over the now silent city. "You cannot kill me, for I am already dead and have no place to go. And I will not kill you, for your daughter still needs a father, however disappointing he may be." Lucifer landed on the ground, his wings tucking back into his suit. He looked exhausted, his breathing heavy. He looked at Charlie, who was standing between them, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with a mix of relief and fury. "This isn't over," Lucifer muttered, though he made no move to restart the fight. "You're still a glitch. You're still an anomaly." "I am the knight," Alucard replied, adjusting his fedora as the last of the blood vanished into his boots. "And the knight doesn't care about your rules." He turned and began to walk back toward the hotel, his boots clicking on the scorched, empty pavement. Behind him, the Pride Ring was a ghost town. The overlords were in hiding, the V's were offline, and the sinners were cowering. Alucard had come to Hell to find a monster, and he had found something far more interesting, a family of failures. As he reached the doors of the Hazbin, he paused and looked back at the shattered sky. The great clock was silent. The silence that followed the recession of the Blood Sea was louder than any scream Pentagram City had ever produced. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet, the kind that exists only in the moments after a god has finished speaking. The streets were no longer paved with neon-lit asphalt. They were scorched, stained with a deep, rust-colored residue that no amount of hellfire could scrub away. The Pride Ring had been humiliated. The hierarchy that had stood for eons, the overlords at the top, the sinners in the middle, and the imps at the bottom, had been flattened by a man who didn't even have a soul to call his own. In the shattered remains of Voxtech Tower, the monitors were finally flickering back to life, but they were no longer broadcasting the V's polished propaganda. Instead, they showed the reality of the wasteland, the mountain of golden feathers from the fallen exorcists, the jagged craters left by Lucifer's fury, and the long, solitary shadow of a man in a red duster walking toward a crooked hotel. Vox was a wreck of sparks and cracked glass, staring at his own irrelevance. He had tried to turn Alucard into a brand, and Alucard had responded by turning his empire into a graveyard. Back at the Hazbin Hotel, the lobby was crowded, but no one was talking. Angel Dust was sitting on the floor, his forearms wrapped around himself, his usual quips replaced by a 1,000-yard stare. Vaggie stood by the bar, her spear gripped so tightly her knuckles were white, her eyes never leaving the front door. Even Alastor, the ever-smiling radio demon, looked diminished. He sat in his usual chair, his cane resting across his knees, but the static around him was thin, a mere whisper of its former self. He had seen a hunger that made his own look like a snack. The doors opened, Alucard walked in. He looked exactly as he had when he first arrived. The red duster was pristine, the fedora was level, and the orange spectacles were perfectly in place. The only difference was the air around him. It didn't just feel cold anymore, it felt hollow. He walked to the bar and looked at Husk. The cat demon didn't say a word. He simply reached under the counter, pulled out a bottle of the most expensive, aged whiskey in the house, something he'd been saving for his own second death, and poured a glass. Alucard took it, nodding once in a silent acknowledgement of respect. "So?" Charlie said, her voice trembling as she stood at the base of the stairs. She looked at Alucard, her eyes no longer filled with the bright, blinding hope of a naive princess. There was a hardness there now, a recognition of the weight of the crown she would one day wear. "You're still here." "I have nowhere else to be, Morningstar," Alucard replied, the whiskey catching the red light of the lobby. "The void is a lonely place, and your father's kingdom has potential. It is a mess, a tragedy, and a joke. But it is active. You almost destroyed it," Vaggie spat, finally finding her voice. "You turned the city into a slaughterhouse. You fought the king. You ate the angels. How are we supposed to redeem anyone when you've shown them that the only thing that matters is how much blood you can spill?" Alucard turned his gaze to her. The orange lenses glowed with a faint, mocking light. I didn't show them anything they didn't already know, little soldier. I simply removed the curtain. Your redemption was a song sung in a vacuum. Now the people of this city know what they are fighting for. They aren't fighting for a place in a heaven that wants to kill them. They are fighting to stay out of the shadow of a man like me. He looked at Charlie. You wanted a challenge, princess. You wanted to prove that even the most broken soul can be mended. Well, look around you. The overlords are broken. The system is shattered. The fear I have planted in this soil will grow into something far more useful than your hope. It will grow into a reason to be better, if only to survive the night. I don't believe that, Charlie said, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. Fear isn't the answer. It's never the answer. In your world, perhaps, Alucard said, finishing his drink. But in mine, fear was the only thing that kept the monsters in their cages. You want to be a savior, Charlie? Then be the one who stands between them and me. Give them a choice. The light of your hotel, or the cold of my grave. I suspect you'll find your vacancy rate dropping quite rapidly. He turned and began to walk toward the stairs, his boots clicking rhythmically on the carpet. As he passed Alastor, the radio demon finally spoke, his voice a low, crackling hiss. A very clever play, Alucard. You've turned yourself into the ultimate motivator. But tell me, what happens when the motivator gets hungry again? Alucard paused, his hand on the banister. He didn't look back. Then the show continues, radio demon. And I hope you've improved your broadcast by then. The static is getting a bit repetitive. The next few weeks in Pentagram City were a fever dream of reconstruction and terror. The I.M.P. crew found themselves busier than ever, not as assassins but as consultants, for demons who were suddenly very, very interested in how to survive encounters with things that didn't stay dead. Blitzo, ever the opportunist, had rebranded the agency as I.M.P. Incredibly Marginal Protection, and business was booming. The V's were in hiding, trying to rebuild their network from the ground up, but the public wasn't buying what they were selling anymore. The Red Death had become a localized deity, a myth that walked the streets in a red coat. People didn't worship him. They acknowledged him as a fact of nature, like a hurricane or a plague. Up in heaven, the embassy was silent. The extermination had been officially postponed indefinitely. The loss of Adam and a significant portion of the exorcist host had sent shockwaves through the celestial hierarchy. There were rumors of a new trial, of Seraphim debating whether to glass the Pride Ring or build a bigger wall. But for now, the sky remained red. Alucard spent most of his time in room 666, looking out the window. Sometimes Charlie would come by and leave a plate of food or a new book, and they would talk, not about redemption, but about history. He told her stories of the surface, of the wars of men and the monsters that hid in their shadows. She told him of her dreams of a hell that didn't have to hurt. They didn't agree on much, but they understood each other. They were both outsiders in a world they were forced to lead. One evening, as the great clock struck midnight, Alucard stood on the balcony of the hotel. He felt the millions of souls within him, finally quiet. He had brought the night to hell, and in the darkness, he saw the first faint flickers of something that wasn't just fear. He saw the sinners of the Pride Ring beginning to build something new, not out of greed or vanity, but out of a desperate, shared defiance. He adjusted his spectacles, the orange glow reflecting the distant, flickering neon of the city. He was the bird of Hermes, and he had finally found a cage big enough to hold him. The arrival of Alucard fundamentally broke the Helluverse, not by destroying its inhabitants, but by exposing the hollowness of their hierarchy. By stalemating Lucifer and humiliating the exorcist army, Alucard stripped away the illusion of safe, eternal suffering. In the aftermath, the Pride Ring entered a state of grim, functional realism. The Hazbin Hotel became a genuine sanctuary, not just out of a desire for goodness, but as the only logical refuge from the apex predator living in room 666. Charlie's dream of redemption shifted from a whimsical fantasy into a necessary survival strategy, overseen by a monster who served as the ultimate deterrent. The overlords were forced to adapt or perish, their influence waning as the damned realized that their masters were just as vulnerable to the Red Death as anyone else. While the conflict between the vampire and the demon king reached a tense truce, the seeds of a much larger war with heaven were sown. Alucard remained an enigma at the center of the chaos, a silent, grinning guardian of a realm that finally understood the cost of a soul.